Good evening. I'm Allison Schilling, Senior Program Officer at the Concord Museum. I always feel very privileged whenever I'm asked to introduce the really remarkable authors and historians who we've hosted in our forums in recent years. I can't tell you the smile that took over my face and the honor and just excitement that I felt when Tom asked me to give tonight's introduction for Ann Patchett. There's no hyperbole in saying Ann Patchett is one of the most celebrated authors of our time. Alex Witchell from the New York Times closed his recent review of the essay collection, These Precious Days, saying, Patchett's heart, smarts, and 40 years of craft to create an economy that delivers her perfectly understated stories, emotionally whole. Her writing style is most gloriously her own. What a privilege it is for me to be one of her many avid readers and to get to experience the glory on every page. Anne has written 8 novels, including Bel Canto, and her 2 most recent novels, Commonwealth and The Dutch House, which was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. Additionally, she is the author of 4 works of nonfiction and 2 delightful children's books about lambs, goats, and language. Time magazine named her one of the most influential people in the world, and she was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Letters in 2017. Anne co-owns Parnassus Books, where she lives in Nashville, Tennessee, an independent bookstore that she's turned into a writer's haven, cultural oasis, and bustling workplace for shop dogs. The foremost which is Sparky, depicted here in the cover of Anne's most recent collection of essays, These Precious Days. Oh, there he is. And the painting is by Suki Raphael, who we will get to hear much more about tonight, I'm sure. The essay collection is available locally at the Concord Bookshop, and if anyone is tuning in from the Nashville area, I'm sure you can find many a signed copy at Parnassus Books. Please feel welcome to submit questions in the chat on YouTube during the forum. I will pass those along to Tom and Anne. Our moderator this evening is Tom Putnam, Director of the Concord Museum. I hope you all enjoy the program. I know I am really looking forward to it, and I'll pass it over to you, Tom.
Well, thank you, Allison. It was a lovely introduction, and what a bonus to get to see and meet Sparky. We're going to talk about dogs, but maybe a little later in the conversation. And Anne, let me echo how tickled we are to have you and honored to have you speak as part of the Concord Museum Forums. The genesis of my invitation was getting These Precious Days from my mother-in-law, who bought it at her local independent bookstore on Christmas. And it's funny because the very next present I opened, my family knows to give me books, was my wife gave me your friend Margaret Wrinkle's collection of essays. So we had a little Nashville theme going on Christmas morning. But I always love the week between Christmas and New Year's. I always take it off and I spend most of it reading books. And after reading this, I thought, well, I met Ann Patchett once. She spoke at my former place of employment, and I'll write a letter. And again, I was just so pleased when you not only responded to my email, but accepted the invitation. So thank you for being here. I thought I would try to give a little bit of a Concord gloss to our conversation. So again, Concord is known for its literary stars. First novelist Louisa May Alcott and Nathaniel Hawthorne. I learned today was on this date in 1850 that the Scarlet Letter was first published, but also essayists Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. I'm going to try to bring them into our conversation a little bit. So but let me just open, you've written novels and you've written essays. So talk to the audience a little bit about the difference for you between writing fiction and nonfiction. You're muted. And you're muted. Oh. We can't hear you.
And why don't you try and leave the meeting and come back in?
There we go. I had just this weird screen that said, welcome to Zoom. So
Okay.
thank you,
Anyway.
Allison, for that excellent introduction and the very, very good advice about leaving and coming back. And glad everybody got to see the dog. Okay. So the question, the difference between writing novels and essays?
Yeah.
Is that where we're starting? Okay.
Yeah.
So in its shortest answer, writing novels, very hard for me. Writing essays, very easy for me. Essays are a wonderful holiday and a way for me to think deeply about something that I'm interested in, and a way for me to have the experience of a beginning, middle, and end on a project that doesn't go on for years and years. I never want to say that writing essays or writing nonfiction is easier than writing fiction. It's just, for whatever reason, easier for me. We had Jesmyn Ward at the bookstore once years ago, and I was asking her questions, and I said, so what's the difference between writing fiction and nonfiction for you? Which is easier? And she looked at me so surprised, and she said, I can't believe that you're asking me that question. I mean, writing nonfiction is so much harder. And I thought, really? When I write nonfiction, I know what the story is. I know when the story begins and when it ends, and I know who all of the characters are and what the setting is and what the moral arc of the narrative is going to be. And in a way, what I have to do is think. I feel like essay writing is really more about how a writer thinks and sees the world. And fiction writing is more about how a writer writes and imagines the world. One's just easier. And also, in the case of essays and a novel, one is much shorter. But there's also a tremendous pleasure in just making everything up, knowing that you're not going to leave anybody out, you're not going to hurt anybody's feelings, and you're not going to get something wrong. You can get things wrong in a novel, but it's not nearly as serious as getting something wrong in a piece of nonfiction. So I consider myself to be a novelist who dabbles in nonfiction, happily.
And with the essays, just it's your sense of observation and insight, I think. I mean, you're such a beautiful writer, but it's kind of chicken and egg, but anyway, talk about where those insights, and are you having those insights while the various things you write about are happening, or is it afterwards that you think back on them? Anyway, I think people might be interested in that.
Well, I think it varies. And there are all sorts of things that I do in my life that don't make me think, wow, this would be a really good essay. And I think that in these happy days, these precious days, wow, that's a first. I botched my own title. I feel like the whole world does that for me. So in these precious days, there's an essay called How to Practice, which is about cleaning out my house after the death of my childhood best friend's father. I did not think, I'm going to clean out the house and then I'm going to write an essay about it. I'm going to clean out the house and really pay attention and write about this. I thought, I'm going to clean out the house because when I die, I don't want to leave all of this junk for somebody else to deal with. And while I had a lot of revelations about myself and my home and my relationship to possessions while I was doing it, I still wasn't thinking about writing about it. It wasn't until my sister's friend shows up with her young daughter, and the daughter says, oh my gosh, you have a typewriter. And then I start thinking, I'm going to give this kid my typewriter. And then I thought, wow, that's a story. That's really an interesting story. And suddenly it all clicked in, from the death of Tavia's father and all of his stuff to all of the work that I had been doing. And what was interesting is we have a 3-story house. And I had, by the time Meg and Charlotte came over and we had the conversation about the typewriter, and I gave Charlotte the typewriter, I had really finished the 2 top floors, but I hadn't done the basement. And the library is in the basement. And at that moment, when I gave her the typewriter and I suddenly thought, wait, this is a great essay, and I went off to write it, I stopped cleaning. And then I had no interest in cleaning the basement. Like I had broken the flow. And it was months and months later that I thought, all right, get back downstairs and do that. And I did. So yeah, when something actually presents itself that you think this would be a good essay, that's sort of a rarity.
Nice. You'll excuse me for, I'm going to say a few words here because I wanted to bring Emerson in. I'm going to bring Thoreau in a little bit later, but I was watching you do an interview with your fellow novelist, Amor Tolles. And I have read his novel, and I remembered, oh, wait a second, there was an Emerson reference in his novel, and I wanted to read a little of it, and it's a segue to my question for you. I won't give the whole context, but in the plot, a dying father leaves a letter to his son, and he's torn out a page of his copy of essays by Ralph Waldo Emerson, of the book which the father held in greatest esteem than any other book. And the father has underlined these lines. So this is Emerson. There's a time in every man's education when he arrives at the conviction that envy is ignorance, that imitation is suicide, that he must take himself for better, for worse, as his portion. That though the wide universe is full of good, no kernel of nourishing corn can come to him through his toil bestowed on that plot of ground which is given to him to till. But through his toil bestowed on that plot of ground which is given to him to till. The power which resides in him is new in nature, and none but he knows what that is which he can do, nor does he know until he has tried. So first I wanted to note that I'm actually in a building that's on land that was owned by Ralph Waldo Emerson. There used to be an apple orchard, and the Emerson family gave it to the Concord Museum, and we have Ralph Waldo Emerson's study in our museum. But the reason that I wanted to do the quote is it seems to me that what you do in these essays is till the territory of your own life. In another interview, I heard you state that you may have roamed in your fiction, but this work tends to reflect a life lived close to home. So let's switch to the title essay, These Precious Days, and how you tell just an absolutely incredible story about a chance friendship, and it becomes an essay that really is, it captures the pandemic especially, but anyway, I'll let you tell the story about your friend, Suki Raphael.
And may I just say that I've been sitting here thinking, oh my God, this is going to be an Emerson pop quiz and I'm going to fail. I mean, like I was just panicked while I was watching this unfold. So
well, you're passing the flag.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. So, I'm sure that you have this, everybody has this, but time since the pandemic is very hard for me to kind of get my hands around. And so I think, how long ago so Suki was here 2 years ago. She came to live with us in the end of February, around February 20th in 2020, and she was here until Memorial Day. She died in April last year. So it was probably 2018 when we first met. And we met because I had written a blurb for Tom Hanks's collection of short stories called Uncommon Type. And because of that, I was asked to come to Washington, D.C. and interview him in a theater. And I said, sure. And then while I was there, I met his assistant, Suki Raphael, who I really liked. And then 2 things happened. One, Tom was really interested in possibly opening a bookstore in Santa Monica. And he also agreed to do the audio recording for the Dutch House. And both of those things went through Suki. So Tom had questions about opening a bookstore, and Suki, I would send Suki people that he should talk to. And then she was also the one who arranged the time for him to be able to record the Dutch House. And because of that, we had this little email exchange. And as you know, email can be a very friendly, personal medium. It wasn't like we were emailing back and forth every day. It would be once a month or once every 2 or 3 months, but it was always love and much love. And what are you doing? And, oh, I've missed you. And what are you reading? And what are you painting? She was a painter. And at some point in this conversation, she said, I'm sorry, I didn't answer your email. I had a medical problem. I had a little surgery. And I wrote back and said, is everything okay? And she had had a Whipple procedure, which is as bad as it gets. She had pancreatic cancer. I didn't know that. And she had come through. She was doing chemo and radiation. And then skipping ahead, things were looking great. She was declared in remission, and then things were not looking great. And because they hadn't been able to locate a tumor, suddenly when they located the tumor, she was in trouble, and she was supposed to have been in a clinical trial for recurrent pancreatic cancer yesterday. And I was telling my husband this story one night. My husband's a doctor, and he said, if she wants to, she should send me her files, and I'll see if I can get her into a trial here. He did. You have to find a trial that matches exactly the kind of cancer you have and what the trial is looking for. She matched. She came out to Nashville. We had met in a theater, in the dark, backstage for a few minutes 2 years before. We had never spoken on the phone. But I said, you're going to come and live with us. And she said, no, I can't. I'll stay for a couple of nights. UCLA, back in Los Angeles, where she lived, was going to start the same trial. She was only going to be here a couple of weeks. The pandemic hit, and she got stuck. There were no flights. There was no white blood cell count. And UCLA, most importantly, UCLA canceled the trial because all over the country, all over the world, trials that weren't up and running were canceled because all medical energy had to go towards COVID. So there we were. I had a full schedule of trips planned for the spring. I was still on book tour for the Dutch House. Carl, who is older, was practicing medicine, but they told him that he had to stay home and do telemedicine. And so there we were, the three of us and the dog, living together in the house. And Suki painted. She went to chemo. She painted. She lived downstairs. Carl was on the main floor in the dining room. I was upstairs, and we were all working. And it turned out to be this amazing, happy, profound time for all of us. And the only thing that I can really equate it to is college. When you show up with your little suitcase and you say, oh, you're the person in the other twin bed. You're the person I'm going to be sharing a room with for the next year. It was really like that. We were so together all the time. We made dinner together. We took our walks together. And Suki was an incredibly present tense person. And she was not so much a verbal person as she was a profoundly visual person. And we talked about art, and we talked about color, and we talked about spring. And we didn't talk about family. We didn't talk about Tom Hanks. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about dinner, and we talked about light, and we talked about books. And it was a very, very different and profound friendship and connection.
So
and then I wrote about it.
Wrote the essay, and you wrote it for Suki. It was just going to be between you and her initially. Just tell the audience a little bit.
So I knew I don't know, after she had been there a couple of weeks, I knew I was going to write about it. And I had a really hard time telling her, a really hard time talking to her about it, because again, she was so private and not private, like secretive. She was private in that she was someone who just didn't talk about herself and she didn't talk about other people. And years ago, Liz Gilbert sent me an essay that she had written. It was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever read. It was amazing. And it was about her neighbors. And I said, "You've got to publish this." And she said, no, I'm not going to publish anything about my neighbors. I love them. I really needed to write this, but I will never publish it. I'm just showing it to you. And that was a real lesson that stuck with me. And so I said to Suki, when I finally was able to talk to her about it, I said, I am going to do this and I am going to give it to you. And it's going to be for us. We have to have a record of this time. And she was painting, she was painting everything in the house. She was painting everything in the yard. And I said, it's the same thing for me. I've got to write about this, but nobody else has to read it except for us. And then if it's okay with you and you want somebody else to read it, we'll do that. But it was very much me painting a picture of her in writing. And when I finished, which I did after she left, I didn't start writing it until the day she left. And then I was asking her questions. We were on the phone every day. We were emailing back and forth. And then when I finished it and I sent it to her, she said, I can't believe that this is how you see me. And I said, show it to your friends. And she gave it to her family. She gave it to her friends. And everybody was like, yeah, that's how I see you. That's who you are. And we really then started to collaborate. She said, well, I don't think I said this here. And, this story was about that. And I bet she read it 50 times. I mean, she just went over it and over it and over it. And then through the weirdest coincidence, it wound up getting published in Harper's Magazine, the whole thing. It was 60 pages long. And that in itself was a crazy story. And I asked Suki, how do you feel about this? She said, okay, I'm in, I love it. And that brought the world to her. I mean, that essay in Harper's went around the world 3 times. And she heard from everyone in her life that she had ever met, that had ever loved her, known her, lost touch with her. People came flooding back. People became incredibly interested in her painting. She started putting her paintings up on Instagram because people wanted to see them. People just sent out so much love and good wishes for her health and for her art. And it was tremendously empowering and comforting and joyful for her. And I look back on all of that and think more good came out of that piece than anything I ever did in terms of writing. And I was very proud of it. And it also seemed like such a lesson about asking, not assuming, not making a decision about what you can and can't do. When people say to me, young people, all people will say, oh, I can't write what I want to write because it would hurt other people. What I have to say is so explosive and damaging and private. I cannot write that. And I always say, you're just letting yourself off the hook. Write it, make it perfect, work and work and work on it. Put it away for a while, look at it again, and then decide. Don't ever decide the fate of something that you haven't bothered to write. And I was so afraid to write it. I was so afraid to say to her, I'm not like I want to exploit this situation, but there's sure a way in which you could look at it that way. I want to use you for my own work. and yet it turned out so well. And also, I had written a book in, I don't know, like 2002 or something, called Truth and Beauty, which was about my best friend Lucy Greeley, who had cancer as a child, and she died of a heroin overdose when we were both 39, because she had a very difficult botched surgery and became addicted to opioids and then went to heroin. Lucy, in every sense, was ahead of her time. And people have said to me over the years, how do you think it would have affected her life if you had written that book when she was still alive? And I always think it wouldn't have affected the outcome of her life, but she would have loved it. And that's the thing that really gave me the courage to do this with Suki. And I'm so glad, because it didn't affect the outcome, but it brought her enormous joy.
Mortality is infused throughout the book, and I wonder, what is a difference writing about losing Lucy when you're 20 years younger, and then living in this era where death seems to be all around us? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, when you lose a friend at 39, it's it's very, very different. It's very, very different, because I was still immortal when I was 39. Right. And so was she, for all she had been through, for all of this, the suffering and the surgeries and the chemo and the drugs and the hard times. I thought that Lucy was like Keith Richards. And I used to say that. I thought, if the world comes to an end, it'll be Lucy and the pigeons who are still around, because she had made it through everything, right? She had survived, where the rest of us, we had no idea. We had never been tested. And as many times as she touched the wire, I always thought she was going to come back. And then she didn't. And it was so devastating. Of course, with Suki, she had recurrent pancreatic cancer. And she had it at the moment at which I decided that we were going to actually become close and know each other. And there are a few wonderfully fortunate people who beat pancreatic cancer. Beating recurrent pancreatic cancer, beating a reoccurrence after a Whipple. I can't, not for me to say, but that's right. I knew how it was going to go. And to just make a decision to be all in, it was a very, very different story.
It's somewhat a cliche, but I will attest I'm one of those who, it is a long essay, the others are shorter, so it kind of would surprise you, but you're used to going along a certain clip, but once you are in that essay, it's impossible to stop reading it until you get to the end. It's just so beautifully written. In the introduction of the book, you write, "Death always thinks of us. Eventually, the trick is to find the joy in the interim and make good use of the days we have." One interviewer said it's a feel-good book about facing mortality. But even I hope viewers are hearing both the beauty of that story, but it's a very uplifting story. So you also, I'm going to move on to another one. You write that you wanted to build, after that essay was completed, you wanted to build a solid shelter for it. And that's hence the collection of these pieces. And we should again mention that Suki is the artist who captured Sparky.
Yes.
And Suki's art
yes.
on the back. So let's turn to the first essay, Three Fathers, which begins with this arresting phrase: "Marriage has always proven irresistible to my family." Tell us a little bit more what's behind that line, and then the genesis of that wonderful essay.
Yeah, everybody in my family got married a lot. That's just sort of what we did. My father was married twice, and my mother was married 3 times, and my sister and I have both been married twice. And I could just kind of take it out to cousins and aunts and uncles in every direction. We didn't stick our landing the first time, but we all kept trying. We all believed in it. And when my sister and I got married for the second time, the sentence construction implying that my sister and I married one another, which was not the case. My sister and I married different people a couple of months apart from each other. And I got married first, but she had planned a wedding. She was going to get married first. And then I sort of ran in and scooped her, but I didn't have a wedding. And she was having a big wedding. And I realized that all three of our fathers were going to be there. So our parents got divorced when I was, let's say, 4. My mother was married to my stepfather, Mike, from about the time I was 6 until I was 24. And then when I was, and I'm just guessing at this point, it's right in the essay. And then when I was 26, my mother married her third husband, Daryl. So all 3 husbands were going to be at Heather and Bill's wedding. And I wanted to get a picture of the 3 of them with me. And I called them all in advance and asked, and they all said yes. And while they were setting up the picture, there was one in which it was just the 3 fathers. And then there was one in which it was the 3 fathers and me, and one in which it was the 3 fathers and me and my sister. And my stepfather, Mike, who was the person that I really grew up with. I mean, he was my sort of day in, day out person. And we were very close. And he said to my dad and to Daryl, "You know what she's doing, don't you?" And they said, "No." And my dad told me this story. And they said, "No." And Mike said, she's getting a picture of the 3 of us together, because when the 3 of us are dead, she's going to write a story about it. And this is going to be the illustration. And in fact, that was exactly what I was doing. And that is exactly what I did. I didn't do it right away. I waited a good bit of time. And in fact, I waited until my friend Kate's father died. And then she said, "I'm going to write a story, an essay about my dad." It was right after he had died. And I said, "Oh, good. I'll go with you. I've been meaning to write this essay for years, and I've just not gotten up a head of steam to kind of crack into it and rethink and refeel all of those feelings. But if you're writing about your father, I can do this." And so we did it together.
There's a lovely line about your father, your biological father. You write, "Contrary to popular belief, love does not need understanding to thrive." Explain a little bit, whereas your stepfather was somewhat encouraging of you to be a writer. Talk a little bit about your own father's feelings about that.
This is one of those things that I really have learned something about myself and my father by talking about this book, by doing tons and tons of interviews. And I really do wish that I could go back and rewrite it, because my father, and I feel like I say this in the essay, but I just didn't say it strongly enough. My father wanted me to be safe.
Right.
My father loved me. It wasn't that my father didn't believe in me, but my father, I mean, it's like having a daughter who says, "I'm going to go to Hollywood and be a movie star." That's what it's like to have a daughter who says, "I'm going to be a writer." It is a recipe for failure. And I know that, and I didn't know that at the time. Or if I did know that, I thought that it was not going to apply to me, because I was different and special, just like everybody who wants to be a writer or a movie star is different and special. And my father wanted me to have a roof over my head and food on the plate, and he didn't want me to be hurt. And that really was his not wanting me to be a writer. His wanting me to have another profession was his love for me, and not just his being negative. But what the quote really means is, this is true for not just one's parents, but all sorts of people. You can really, really love somebody who doesn't understand you particularly, who doesn't share your vision particularly. It's fine. Yeah. God, it's great to be old. and just to understand these things, because when you're young, it's like, you have to know me. If you love me, you've got to know me. You've really got to understand me. I don't think so. And my husband is a perfect example. My husband is not, shall we say, particularly interested in my books. And he keeps, when we talk about this, and it was so hard for me for years and years, like he reads them, but it takes him 3 weeks to, read one of my novels. It's not fun. It's the least happy time in our marriage when I finish a new book and give it to him. And then when he's finished, he hands it back and he says, "Oh, I liked it." Like, oh God, really? I've been working on this for 2 years and that's all I get? And he's like, "No, I did. I really liked it." You can really love somebody and not have them understand every aspect of what you do or be there in every possible way. In fact, chances are you are never going to find somebody who understands every aspect of who you are and what you do. And my husband always says, everybody loves Ann Patchett and I love Ann. And I think, well, you know what? That's better. That's really good.
That is a lovely line.
Yeah.
A lot of the essays end on a hopeful note. A lot of them end with images of light. And I thought I might just read the last line of this one. Again, you're talking about your extended family and you're all around a dining room table at your mother's house with your sister, spouses, some step siblings. And you write, "There had never been so many people in that house before, and the chaos and conversations turned into a kind of light. And I, who was always looking to slip away, wanted to stay with them." Were you conscious when you put the essays together that this theme of light would kind of permeate?
Yes. And in part because several friends pointed it out when they read the whole thing in manuscript. Such an interesting thing about writing essays is you have to figure out the ways in which they relate to one another. And make sure that you don't overuse certain words. Things that are absolute, like every essay can be fine. And then when you put them together, you start thinking, wow, there's a lot of light in here. And I did trim it back, but I was aware of it and I couldn't get rid of all of it because it seemed very true. And this is a book about death with a lot of light in it. I have a friend who just finished his first book of essays. He's a pediatric neurosurgeon, and he used the word leathery when discussing the dura, the covering of the brain. Used the word leathery about 15 times in the book because he had worked on every separate essay, but hadn't just read it straight through. And I called him in a panic and I was like, do a word search on leathery immediately. You can't do this. Yeah, that's just light. That's just the way it is.
So this is a little self-promotional, but it leads to a question. So we did this lovely flyer about our upcoming programs, and we have, again, Emerson, Thoreau, Hawthorne, and Alcott, and we have you and Billy Collins as the kind of current literary superstars. So I thought with that backdrop, this should be the moment for the big reveal for those who haven't read the book, to have you share with the audience your most important literary influence.
Snoopy?
Yes.
Snoopy?
Yeah.
There's so many things that you just never see coming. And one of the things that I never saw coming is that by writing an essay about Snoopy, what that means is that people who write to me, and people write to me at the bookstore, I get tons of mail And now people are sending me Snoopy cards, and I love them. They make me really happy. And a woman wrote to me not a week ago. I haven't even answered the letter. And she sent me a stack of peanut strips that she had cut out of the newspaper that were just some of her favorites, paper clipped them together and mailed them to me. It's like, God, I love this. This makes me so happy. So there's a guy that I know named Andrew Blauner, and he's an agent and he edits anthologies. And he said he was putting together something called the Peanuts Papers, an anthology of writers and illustrators writing about different Peanuts characters. And he said, would you write an essay? And I said, I'm kind of done with anthologies, don't really want to do it. And I said, the only way I do it is if you give me Snoopy, and you're not going to give me Snoopy. And he was like, well, sure, you can have Snoopy. I'm like, oh my God. And I got these huge Peanuts omnibus books, started reading them, because when I was thinking I want to write a profile about Snoopy, I really didn't realize the extent to which Snoopy had shaped my entire life, and that everything I knew about writing came from Snoopy, because Snoopy sent his stories off to New York. He got rejected. His books were remaindered. He was out of print. He got a contract. The contract was canceled. Everything I've ever been through, Snoopy had already been through. And when I started reading those strips with an eye towards writing that essay was just absolutely a blast. And it's been so, so great to hear from people who say, I had no idea that there were more of us out there. And now I want to say something about illustration. Behind your head, my friend Barry Mosier.
Mm-hmm.
Barry, I keep just looking at Barry's
Waldo,
art.
Emerson. Yes.
Barry's art behind your head. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a book cover.
Yeah, I know. I've got the book. Got the book. It's great.
Speaking of Andrew Blauner, he was actually here this
look at that.
fall, because he did a book on writers writing about Thoreau. So,
of course he did. And he asked me to be in that book. And I said, I'm just not up to speed.
Snoopy,
Again, it's the pop
Thoreau.
quiz. Right. I'm not the one for the job.
I love the last slide of that essay. I hope you don't mind my reading some of these. People ask me about my influences, but really it was just the one. Snoopy was my aspiration, my role model. I heard the dog whistle, silent to everyone around me, and followed. Which is a lovely line. Well, actually, good segue. The Thoreau is up there, and I have Bob Richardson's book about Thoreau too. I don't think Barry Mosier did the cover of that one, but I thought it would shift to your essays. You've already referenced one about kind of your relationship with material possessions, and of course, many religious traditions counsel taking vows of poverty, but if there's an American secular saint in that regard, it would be Henry David Thoreau. And I wanted to read a quote from Thoreau and a quote from you. Few sentences better capture an entire book than this one. In Walden, he wrote, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. And in your introduction, you write, through these essays, I could watch myself grappling with the same themes in my writing and in my life, what I needed, whom I loved, what I could let go, and how much energy the letting go would take. Again and again, I was asking what mattered most in this precarious and precious life. So anyway, tell us a little bit about the essay. Maybe you can talk more about My Year of No Shopping. You've already referenced the How to Practice essay, but just that's a theme in the book.
Yes. It was just I know a woman who told me that she had done this once for a year, and I was very interested. And there were several times I gave up shopping for Lent, and I found it very peaceful. And then I decided that I was going to give up shopping for a year, which I think coincided with the inauguration of Trump. Just seemed like a good time to sort of pare things down. And it made me, it just made me incredibly happy. And I really wasn't expecting it. And I put together a set of rules, and it was personal. It was my rules. I could buy books, I could go out to dinner, I could buy flowers, I could buy something if I needed it. For example, if I ran out of shampoo. But then I discovered that every time I bought a bottle of shampoo over the years and didn't like it, I didn't get rid of it. I just threw it under the sink. And so, there were 10 bottles of shampoo under the sink. I looked for a lip balm one day. I found like 8 of them. And what people ask me all the time is, so did you start shopping again? And my answer is yes, but the experience of not shopping for a year ruined it for me. And so, yes, I have gone back to buying things, but there's not anything I want. So it's not like I'm trying not to buy things anymore. It's just that there aren't, I realize, any things that I want. And it also was my year of not shopping. And buying is a byproduct of shopping, but shopping is flipping through the J. Crew catalog when it comes, or, if you've had a hard day and you're kind of strung out and you go on the J. Crew website and you start looking at sale sweaters. You don't really want one, but you're just going through and looking at sweaters. That was what I stopped. It was the mindless shopping. And it wasn't like I was some huge shopper to begin with. But once you stop doing that, once you take all the catalogs and put them right into the recycle bin and you don't go on the websites anymore, just the wild outcome is you don't buy things. And it really just brought me all sorts of peace, because it is true. It breaks the habit of always thinking in terms of what you might want. And when you can break the habit of thinking what you want, it is a little easier to think about what other people might need.
I referenced the quote where you talk about the good use of the days that we have. And for you, it's reading and writing. Talk about how reading and writing and books play a role in your life and how they go together.
I always think of reading and writing as walking on 2 legs. And they are so deeply connected. I'm not always writing, but I am always reading. But I will tell you, the thing that's interesting to me about my reading life is I have co-owned a bookstore for 10 years now, and it has absolutely changed every aspect of how I read, because I used to read around throughout the world and throughout history. And I would read a Dickens, and then I would read James Baldwin, and then I would read Toni Morrison, and then I would read Elizabeth Strout, and then I would read Jane Austen. And it was everywhere. And the outcome of that kind of reading is all the books I read were great. And now I only read books that haven't been published. I only read galleys, and it's really been true for 10 years. And I read a lot of books that are not great. And I feel incredibly thrilled when I read a book that's great. But I read books, and I read as much nonfiction as fiction, but I read books the way other people read the newspapers. My reading is so current. And I feel like every week I will have read all the books that came out, but I will have read them 6 months ago. And then the books come out. All books are published on Tuesday. And so every Tuesday at the bookstore, we have a video called the Tuesday Laydown Diaries, in which we talk, I talk, and several other booksellers talk about the books that are coming out this week. And it'll be Tuesday, and there won't be one book I will have read. And it seems so shocking to me, because all I do is read books that haven't been published yet. If you would like to talk about brand new books, boy, I'm your gal.
I'm going to talk about an old book, but Bob Richardson, who wrote that biography of Emerson, wrote this lovely book, First We Read, Then We Write, Emerson on the Creative Process.
I remember that book. Yeah.
And Emerson counsels the same, that his reading is, and he talks about being an active reader, like, engaging with the words and writing in the margins. And
well, it's okay, but it's interesting because being an active reader can also be engaging with the world right now. The books that are being written about what's going on in fiction, in nonfiction right now. And it does make me feel like a tremendously engaged reader. Can I recommend a couple books?
Please.
Okay. So Margaret Rankle for essays, both her first book, Late Migrations, and her new book, Graceland at Last. Oh, look at you. Good on you.
Well, that's the other one I got for my Christmas present.
Oh, that's right. But it's such a fabulous book. Hanif Abdurraqib, Little Devil in America. You want to talk about a book I never would have read if I hadn't owned a bookstore. He won the Carnegie Medal this year. Now, Carnegie Medal is 2 categories. There's one for fiction, one for nonfiction. That's voted on by all the librarians in the country. You think about nonfiction, memoir, biography, history, everything. He won that book, won this year, Little Devil in America. Jennifer Egan has a book that's going to come out in a couple of weeks called The Candy House, which is one of the best novels I've read, period. It is so breathtaking. And this is who I am. It's like, I just want to tell people what to read. So it's good I have a bookstore.
I love the little anecdote. It's just a simple one about you're meeting the Hare Krishna in O'Hare Airport who looks like John Denver and wearing a pink Oxford shirt, but he helps carry your bags, but it relates to your love of books.
Yes. So this was when I was in graduate school in Iowa. I was 21 or 22 and I was changing planes in O'Hare and lost. And I met this guy who looked like John Denver, and he turned out to be a Hare Krishna. And my plane turned out to be late, and we sat and talked for a couple of hours. And he said, imagine loving God so much that you wanted to stand in an airport and tell people about how wonderful this love was. And people just ran past you. But it didn't matter because it was so huge and so important, and you had to do it. And that is the way I feel about books. I mean, I just want to tell people all the time to read, to read, to read. And especially in the great state of Tennessee, where the governor and the state legislature are now talking about introducing a bill that would put school librarians in jail if the legislature, deemed the book to be in any way obscene, forgetting that all of those children have phones on them that have all of those books. It is such theater. And the idea that people could still be going after books in that way. We can carry a gun. We don't have to wear a mask, but we want to make sure that our children are protected from mouse. Tennessee, all the way.
We do have a question from the audience. Always nice to bring them in. Your essays are warm and often very personal. Does openness come easily to you? Do you sometimes struggle with how open to be?
Yeah, openness comes easy to me. A neighbor of mine who is an oncologist, after he read the piece about Suki, he stopped me one morning when we were walking our dogs and he said, how can you do that? How can you just be that open? And I said, that's not how I write. That's how I am. And that's the thing about essays. Essays really are not about how you write. They are about who you are. And yeah, I'm like this all the time. And I never think of it as being particularly open. I'm not worried about revealing something or wondering. I know what not to reveal. It seems quite clear to me. The things that would make the reader sort of cringe and flee, I don't do that.
Maybe just very briefly to pitch the book one more time, talk a little bit more about the genesis of the cover and your working with Suki and choosing the cover, the colors, and
yeah, the colors. That's the really moving part. I'm getting the dog back. Hang on. So
the way to get Sparky back into the.
So Suki painted Sparky a couple of times while she was living with us. Here, your ears turned inside out. That's not a great look. See, look, isn't that an excellent likeness? Yeah, come on. But it wasn't just the paintings, it was the design. And Suki was really, really sick. Suki was really sick when we were putting that cover together and couldn't decide if it should be the dog or the woodpecker. Finally, I said, okay, I want it to be the dog and the woodpecker. And she had the most profound sense of color of anyone I've ever known in my life. And we went through all of these colors. The woman who was the head of the art department, mocked up like 100 different color combinations for the jacket. Suki and I picked, and they made the covers and they sent them to us. And she said, I don't like them. And they were a purple and a teal blue. And I said, you're right. And I called HarperCollins, and God love them. They were like, okay, if she's not happy, we're not happy. And she picked out that red. I mean, just looked at so many reds and so many pinks, and worked on it so hard to get it exactly right. It was just a huge, huge gift. In the same way that I went over the words again and again and again, she went over those colors so many times and made sure they were exactly the right colors. And she died before the book came out, but she got to see the final finished jacket.
Oh, well, it's a lovely note to end on. If you don't mind, another small turn of words from me to close. I got some of these quotes every morning, and there was one 2 days ago from Maxine Hong Kingston. In a time of destruction, create something: a poem, a parade, a community, a school, a vow, a moral principle, one peaceful moment. And perhaps we should add a powerful, generous, and uplifting book of essays, which is what you provided. And in them, you talk about when you were a grad student at the University of Iowa, you met Louise Erdrich, who you describe as a vision of all that was good in the world. And on behalf of many of your readers, Ann Patchett, not Ann, you do the same for us, and we thank you for it. And lastly, if the trick is to find the joy in the interim and make good use of the days that we have, what a joy it's been for me to read this book and to prepare for this interview and spend the last hour with you. So
thank you, Tom. It's been a lot of fun. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Good. Sure. Good night. We thank you all for viewing and wish everyone a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ann.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Allison.
That
was easy and fun, and
good.
Thanks.
Great.
I'm gonna go walk Sparky.
Okay.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.